Hello, all you madmen and maniacs. Chainsaw Valkyrie coming to you again with another chapter of Tales from the Holler. I hope you're not forgetting to be looking for cameos and Easter eggs. Something might be important later. Now, enjoy Frankendoddy. Here on the mountain out past Cheryl's Ridge, past Brogy Holler and across Tatum's Bridge, is filled with the barn that is painted blood red, that it can chill a man's soul and fill him with dread. The barn is a piece of the old gossip farm, and the things that went on there is cause for alarm. Inside the barn that is crimson and ruddy is a lab filled with things that are sick, gross, and bloody. There are test tubes and stretchers and old body parts, and jars filled with brains and with livers and hearts. The lab in the barn belonged to Tim Gossett, a retired local doctor that sold water faucets. Tim started that business to cover his badness, 'cause his mind became sick and was filled with the madness. He was obsessed with the Frankenstein movie. He saw it while young and he thought it was groovy. He wanted to build his own monster creature, like the one that he saw in that Frankenstein feature. So he began to rob graves and to steal rotten bodies, even the corpse of one Franklin Lee Dottie. Franklin was killed by that creature called Murray, the werewolfy fiend who is toothy and furry. Franklin was huge. He stood 7 feet. He was too big for even Murray to eat. So he tore at his throat and he ripped off his head, and he snapped on one leg and he left him there dead. Tim drug him home with his old garden tractor and went right to work for the ghoulish extractor. He cleaned up the body and attached a new leg, which he fastened with stitches and with small metal pegs. Then he sewed on his head of a hideous neighbor. Then he searched for a brain, which became a great labor. He searched the graveyard for the freshly deceased, to find the right brain for his mammoth-sized beast. He then found the grave of a local crazed killer, who mulched up 10 people with a new garden tiller. The butcher himself had been murdered and hacked by a killer more vicious, by the name of Mad Jack. Tim took the brain, but he left the whole body. He took what he needed to raise Frankendoddy. And back to his barn for his gory endeavor, he had all his parts and could start it whenever. He sawed off the top of the hideous head and inserted the brain of the psychotic dead. Then he sewed it back up with big ghastly stitches, while blood was a-dribbling all over his breeches. Then he stood back and said with a big ghoulish grin, "My cadaver is ready. I now can begin." He took some spark plugs from his green machine mowers, some long copper wires from his autumn leaf blower, and an old water pump from a '69 Chevy, along with a pair of work boots that were heavy. Then he put the spark plug in the necks of the body, the one that had recently been Frankendoddy. The water pump Tim attached to the heart, then continued to work on his grim macabre art. He pumped in some blood and a clear salty brine that had an appearance like a type of moonshine. He had dressed Frankendoddy in bib overalls and sewn up the wounds left by Murray's great claws. Then he put his cadaver in a glowing machine that was painted completely with deep John Deere green. He hooked booster cables to his Mustang GT, then he started it up, and he counted to 3. The loose ends he hooked to the green life appliance that he built to cheat death in an open defiance. He threw a few levers and the machine roared to life, while Tim peeled an apple with an old paring knife. The machine flashed and glowed and made bizarre whirrings as the body inside began slowly stirring. Tim flipped a switch, and to his great surprise, the once dotty creature now opened his eyes. "It's alive! It's alive!" he shouted with glee, then unstrapped the creature and set the beast free. Tim unhooked the machine from his old jumper cables, as the creature now free sat up from the table. Tim said, "I've done it! I've created a man!" But the beast on the table did not understand. All that he knew was that he wanted to kill, to crush and destroy. It would give him a thrill. He grabbed him, his maker, by the top of the head, and he squeezed and he crushed until Tim was quite dead. His head started cracking, and it made a loud pop, Then his brain hit the floor with a sickening plop. And then Frankendoddy, with a stiff-legged gait, broke down the barn door with a rage-infused hate. He stalked off in silence through the dark of the night, as the autumn wind howled in the palish moonlight. That's what I saw, I told my Aunt Jenny. Then I told my Gramps and the new Sheriff Benny. The sheriff checked out the red crimson barn, and what he found there, it caused great alarm. He found Dr. Tim, the one who'd sold faucets, the last of his family, the last of the gossets. With his head crushed and shattered and covered in gore, his brain like a jelly, smeared on the floor, he found the Doc's journal that detailed the whole story. He found secret rooms filled with things that were gory. He found jars of blood, he found bodies and hearts. He found a whole room full of spare body parts. The sheriff assembled the townsfolk together to hunt down this fiend in the cool autumn weather. Men carried torches and pitchforks and hatchets. They deployed hunting dogs in an effort to catch it. We followed its tracks, which were giant in size, but were small when compared to those clodhopper guys. The tracks led us straight to the old Mickle farm, where he caused destruction and chaos and harm. We found the remains of this guy Danny Mickle, with his head twisted off like the lid on sweet pickles. Then we found the cadaver of dear Abby Miles, her face still adorned with an ear-to-ear smile. She looked quite at peace with her head twisted round, as she stared up at us from the cold, muddy ground. The next victim found was a girl named Letitia. She was out camping with our local militia. The patchwork behemoth pulled her legs from her body. She died at the hands of the foul Frankendoddy. His trail it was littered with those he had strangled, pulverized bodies left broken and mangled. We had to put down this colossal psychotic. Our lynch mob was angry and became quite chaotic. We followed him on out to Razorback Holler, to the marshy mud pits where the boar go to waller. When the freakish monstrosity saw us, he moaned. He threw a large boulder. He grunted. He groaned. He fled from the torches, the pitchforks and men, into the marsh where he met his own end. The brutish thing struggled and roars as he sank into the mud as it bubbled and stank. The deep marshy pit sets the killer right down. May he rot there in peace neath the black muddy ground. We gathered our men with their pitchforks and torches and made our way home to go sit on our porches, to mourn for our dead and to bury their bodies and try to forget the foul Frankendoddy. That was 2 years ago, the best I remember, on that cold second day in the month of December. When old Dr. Gossett sewed pieces together of dead body parts with his long strips of leather and brought them to life in his evil machine, the one that was painted a deep John Deere green, and brought forth a creature full of malice and rage, seeking to kill and crush and rampage, who stalked through the night like a shadow of death, but in the mud pits he breathes his own final breath. The creature he perished in the mud there that night, but we never forgot all the terror and fright. The folks on the mountain still live with the dread that somehow he lived and is really not dead. Some even fear that old Granny Ferris, the queen of the witches, the devil's own heiress, called up his body from that pit full of mud to kill in her name and to shed lots of blood. So if you ever go down to Razorback Holler, down to the pit where the boar go to waller, and you hear a faint moaning hang on the wind, be quiet and listen, and take special care. It might be the creature, Frankendoddy his name, looking to kill, to murder and maim. Thank you for listening. Follow us on YouTube and Facebook. Stay creepy.